I vow to obey orders from the Emperor and orders from the guardians appointed above me.
Something's wrong.
He set his bread down and pressed the bruises on his face. They were sore, but not horribly. 3 days had passed since the first phase, and he thought the healing process was moving along fine.
I didn't mean the bruises. You haven't been sleeping.
Is it that obvious?
It's the eye bags. And the oily hair.
Yahshi ran his fingers through his hair. He had showered that morning, so he didn't believe Vell's claim about the oiliness, but the eye bags were likely true. Over the past few days, he had been so preoccupied with Pinto's slow recovery and his personal essay that sleep had sunk to the bottom of his priority list.
Do you think he'll show up today?
Yahshi figured she was referring to his roommate and shook his head. Pinto had already accepted that he wouldn't be well enough to participate in the second phase of their sparring filtration, which meant he'd have to rely on the final opportunity 3 days from now to earn his pin. Yahshi and VELL finished their plates in silence before heading to the lecture hall together. QUAX and KEIYO passed them as they scaled the staircase, and Yahshi caught a glimpse of the golden pins on their collars.
Today I need to win. I have to.
VELL shivered, and Yahshi crossed his arms. It was cold despite the hot weather, but perhaps the chill was only in their minds. When they entered the lecture hall, VELL made a beeline for her seat, while Yahshi crept toward Professor Ember's desk and slipped his rewritten paper in front of her. He waited for a glance of acknowledgement, but it never came, so he stomached her indifference and made his way down the aisle. For the second morning in a row, SUNNA's empty chair stole Yashi's attention as he took a seat next to it.
Hopefully SUNNA's doing okay.
He had overheard QUAX and KEIYO badgering Limbo for updates on SUNNA's condition, as Limbo now shared a quarter with him. It was relieving to know that SUNNA hadn't been one of the trainees to get hospitalized and filtered, but Yahshi still worried about him. Was he recovering faster than Pinto? The bell rang, cueing the trainees to stand.
I pledge my allegiance to the Fukui Empire.
They sat back down. But Professor Ember remained standing.
I see more empty seats than I'd like to. If your roommate is still recovering, I ask that you pass today's news on to him.
Yahshi counted 7 empty seats when there should have only been 3. 17 trainees remained in the program, but 4 were still too sickly to attend classes. Yahshi wondered how many of them would make it through the week.
You have a history exam the day after tomorrow.
Professor Ember paused, and Yahshi folded his hands together in his lap, hoping for anything but another filtration.
The trainee with the lowest score will be filtered from the program.
Yahshi and QUAX shot their hands into the air as whispers filled the lecture hall. Professor Ember locked eyes with QUAX first.
Yes.
What topics, Professor?
I will say only this. Study smart, not hard.
She paused for dramatic effect before finally making eye contact with Yahshi and gesturing for him to speak.
Go ahead.
That's the day before our final sparring opportunity with Commander Ross.
Professor Ember smiled.
All the more reason to earn your pin this afternoon. Agreed?
His vision blurred as the room began to tilt, so he closed his eyes to keep the dizziness at bay. He couldn't believe the Academy Guardians would purposefully overlap filtrations like this.
You said it yourself.
Yashi's eyes snapped open at the sound of Cal's voice. The lecture hall had morphed into the woods by Citrus Secondary, and he was standing with a sturdy log in his hands.
You need to win today.
Yahshi looked around but couldn't find her.
Leave me alone!
He flinched as Chima appeared in front of him, blood dripping down his face.
Do it.
Cal, stop!
What are you waiting for?
Yashi's grip on the log tightened against his will. He jumped from his seat with a gasp and found himself back in the lecture hall, pinching his pinless collar. All eyes were on him. QUAX raised his brows.
Cal?
Yahshi studied his hands. He wasn't holding a log anymore.
Is something wrong?
I'm sorry, Professor.
Sit down.
He took a seat, ignoring the amused stares of his fellow trainees. When Professor Ember began a lecture, their attention shifted back to preparing for the new filtration, but Yahshi didn't take a single note. Cal's presence was becoming more frequent, and he could no longer ignore it. While the others wrote furiously in their notebooks, Yahshi scanned the room for Cal's face. paranoid that he'd spot her sitting in one of the empty seats, watching him.
I'm not like you, Cal.
You should be.
He closed his eyes, trying to mentally will her presence away. He had never initiated a conversation with Cal before, and the new development made his hands sweaty. Professor Ember's words muddled into a blur as he tapped his boot against the floor and bit at the end of his pencil. When the bell for medical class rang, he was the first trainee out the door. VELL caught up to him in the hallway.
You're seeing things, aren't you?
Hearing, mostly.
What are you hearing?
Voices.
Voices? Or just one?
Yahshi watched his boots as they started to climb the staircase to the 5th floor. He wouldn't allow himself to tell VELL about Cal's voice, because doing so would lead to a discussion about the incident, and a discussion about the incident would always leave him feeling worse. He was finally committed to the program, and the last thing he needed was to fall back into that rabbit hole and dwell on the one memory that had always held him back.
Well, whatever you're hearing, it's not unusual. Hallucinations are a side effect of belladonna intoxication.
Yahshi raised his head to face her.
It started after the first dose, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That explains it then.
He caught himself fidgeting with his vest buttons and shoved his hands into his pockets.
Well, it's nice to know I'm not going crazy. But I hope the effects wear off soon. I miss relying on the morning bell to wake me up. Now it just mocks me.
After medical class, Yahshi informed Pinto about the upcoming research filtration before heading to the training room with VELL. She had suggested skipping lunch to avoid exercising on a full stomach and get some extra practice in, which Yahshi had considered a sharp move. But the pinless Brackle twins had the same idea. Limbo and Salen were already sparring together in the training room when he and VELL arrived. Yahshi used the opportunity to study their fighting styles. Limbo was clearly the sloppiest and angriest of the trainees in their cycle. He had lost his match against Derlin Ozo in the first phase because he tripped over one of his boot laces. They were tied in triple knots today. In contrast, Salen's level-headed nature made him the stronger of the two. He was always one step ahead, and whether Limbo knew it or not, Yahshi could tell that Salen was leading the match, stringing his brother along and teaching him in the process. Limbo's presence held more weight in every room, yet secretly he was nothing but his brother's shadow.
Well, shall we get started?
VELL faced Yahshi and raised her hands.
Let's do it.
He had only practiced with VELL the previous day, but she was already improving. Her stance was stronger, and her strikes were faster and lacked hesitation. But she was still an easier opponent than either of the Brackle twins. Getting paired with VELL was technically Yashi's best-case scenario, but it was also the scenario he dreaded the most.
That's what happens when you get too close to people. You lose sight of what matters.
Yahshi ignored her voice. Perhaps if he pretended she wasn't there, she eventually wouldn't be. The 4 trainees stopped practicing when Commander Roz entered the room, his golden stopwatch in hand. Yahshi glanced at the clock as he and the other trainees gathered around the sparring range, and his shoulders stiffened. He had expected Pinto not to show for the second phase, but SUNNA and 2 other pinless boys were absent due to the first dose as well.
VELL, PATURA, and Limbo Brackle, you're up first. Please enter the sparring range.
Yahshi turned to VELL.
Good luck.
Thanks.
She stepped forward, joining Limbo in the green zone. Yahshi bit his lip as the pair faced each other, hands raised.
You may begin.
VELL's gaze dropped to Limbo's boots, and his lips parted. When he looked down to check his laces, VELL sprinted toward him. He stumbled backward before coming to a stop near the edge of the sparring range. VELL readied to push him out of bounds, but Limbo raised his chin. His eyes narrowed. He ducked under her arms and struck her in the side. Salen folded his hands together.
Good job, brother.
Yahshi shook his head.
Come on, VELL.
She recovered quickly, jolted out of view, and jammed her boot into the back of Limbo's knee, a move she had tested on Yahshi the evening prior. Her opponent nearly lost balance, but he crouched and set his palm on the floor to ground himself. VELL backed away, her breath racing.
She was so close.
Limbo hopped to his feet and proceeded to jog around the edge of the sparring range. From the center of the green zone, VELL spun in place, eyes locked on her moving target.
He's trying to make her dizzy.
VELL came to the same conclusion. She started to run behind Limbo, keeping an even distance between his back and his face. They had each other in check, but after a few loops, VELL ran faster, aiming to close the gap and shove him out of orbit from behind. Before her palms could meet his back, Limbo pivoted, stepping toward the center of the green zone and disappearing from VELL's view. With his opponent near the edge and himself planted inward, he now had the upper hand, and when VELL turned to face him, he pushed her with a force that left her flying out of the sparring range. Yahshi flinched as VELL struck the black zone with a single roll. As Commander Roz approached Limbo with a golden pin to declare his victory, Yahshi circled around the sparring range and helped VELL to her feet. She attempted to move her shoulder and winced.
Great.
That was impressive, really. You almost had him.
With watery eyes, she watched Commander Roz attach the pin to Limbo's collar.
VELL, please see Blimmery in the infirmary. He should take a look at that shoulder.
Sorry, VELL.
Limbo apologized, but his eyes were on his newly earned pin.
I'll see you at supper?
Good luck.
She made her way toward the door with a tight grip on her shoulder, but Limbo lingered to spectate his brother's match.
Yahshi KONYA and Salen Brackle, you're up next.
Yahshi clenched his hands into fists as he joined Salen on the sparring range.
I have to stay focused.
You may begin.
He waited for Salen's first move, a punch, which he dodged. Yahshi blocked Salen's second attack and ducked under the third.
Why haven't you struck back?
I hate fighting without a good reason to.
You have your reason. You want to graduate, don't you? To keep the innocents safe? To prolong peace on the island?
That's a different kind of reason.
How so?
A knife-jabbing pinch in his ribs knocked Yahshi back to reality. His breath caught in his throat as he doubled over, clutching his torso. Salen knocked Yahshi off balance before he could recover from the strike, and his head slammed into the floor with a thud.
You're too soft, Yahshi. That's why you lose.
Yahshi tried to break free, but the pressure of Salen's bony knee against his chest was making it nearly impossible to even breathe.
I can't win.
He tapped the floor twice, forfeiting the match.
Are you okay?
Salen unpinned him immediately and helped him up, but Yahshi ignored his question. As Commander Roz attached a pin to Salen's collar, the metal door slid open. Pinto and SUNNA wobbled into the room, their faces bright red. Yahshi should have been pleased that Pinto managed to show up, or at least grateful to see SUNNA for the first time in days, but he felt nothing.
It's nice to see the two of you. Pinto Dempsey and SUNNA RICKABEE, please enter the sparring range.
Salen gave his brother a high five before passing the latecomers and leaving the training room, but once again, Limbo stayed behind to spectate. He smirked as Pinto and SUNNA dragged themselves onto the green zone and faced each other.
Clever. I must admit, I'm impressed.
With a grin, Commander Roz clicked a button on his stopwatch.
You may begin.
Although Yahshi wasn't in the mood to stick around, leaving might offend Pinto, so he took a seat on the floor.
Our research exam is the day after tomorrow. What are the odds I pass it and earn my pin during the final phase?
Yahshi hardly watched. He spent a majority of the match pulling at his bootlaces, peeking up occasionally to see the boys fighting as though they'd spun around 100 times beforehand. Eventually, he looked up to see Pinto walking toward Commander Roz to receive his pin, while SUNNA stood shamefully with one foot in the black zone.
Why didn't I try harder? Even Pinto won his match today, so what am I doing wrong?
When Pinto faced him with a shiny pin on his collar, Yahshi offered an unenthusiastic nod of approval.
Limbo, would you help Pinto and SUNNA to the infirmary?
Limbo looked away.
Fine.
Yahshi stood to join them, but Commander Roz caught his gaze and held it firmly.
Is something wrong, Commander?
The Guardian waited for Pinto, SUNNA, and Limbo to exit the room before speaking.
Do you know why you keep losing?
Yahshi thought of Cal and her voice.
I'm not sure.
During your matches against QUAX, KO, and Salen, you hesitated at every opportunity to strike. What are you afraid of?
I'm not afraid. I've seen what happens when people go too far. I wouldn't want to hurt anyone like that.
You know what hurts me the most in my field of work? Seeing talented trainees like you ignore their potential.
Yahshi was dying to look away and break the tension, but he didn't want to appear ungrateful for a private critique. He forced his eyes to widen instead.
You have more combat experience than most trainees here, but the moment you're in the green zone, it all goes down the drain. If you want to succeed here, that's a big problem for you.
Of course he wanted to succeed here. The program was his only path to move on, and feel better, and do good. The Guardians had given him the opportunity to secure a respectable future for himself, and honor his mother's memory, and he would not be so ignorant as to pour that down the drain. He was done being the star student turned lowlife, the witness corrupted by trauma, the boy who never left the woods that day. He was ready to be selection material.
How do I fix it?
I want you to think about the moment you punched QUAX on Selection Day Eve. You had a strong drive, a fire within you, and I appreciated that. Only 5 trainees will graduate from the program, and I want you to be one of them. But to earn your spot in the final 5, you need to light that match again.
He gripped Yahshi's shoulder and shook it lightly.
Can you do that for me?
Yahshi lowered his head, knowing Commander Roz was right. If he had fought to his full potential, perhaps he would have earned a pin by now. He had helped VELL quiet her mind during combat, but he had yet to quiet his own. He had not moved on completely. Not yet.
I can't graduate from the academy as the same boy who entered. I need to change.
Yahshi raised his chin.
I can do that for you, Commander.
After leaving the training room, Yahshi headed to the infirmary to check on Pinto and VELL. He was climbing the staircase when he stopped, spotting Limbo, who was making his way down. Yahshi suddenly despised everything about him. His tightly laced boots, his melodramatic bird tattoo, his punchable frown. Limbo came to a halt a few steps above Yahshi, overshadowing him.
What the hell are you staring at?
How's VELL?
Well, she's not my sister, so why should I care?
She's hurt because of you.
I didn't choose to fight VELL, did I?
He crossed his arms.
What's the real problem here?
She needs to win more than you do.
We're in a competitive program, not a charity group. Did you expect me to lose on purpose just because you fancy her?
I don't.
It's your fault you lost today. Don't take it out on me.
Yahshi gritted his teeth as Limbo passed him.
He's right. It is your fault. If only you'd listen.
Shut it, Kiehl.
He waited for the echo of Limbo's footsteps to fade before climbing the remaining steps to the 5th floor. In the infirmary, Pinto and SUNNA were lying on 2 beds, while VELL was sitting on a 3rd, icing her shoulder.
Oh, Yahshi, it's good that you're here. Ice your face, please.
Yes, Doctor.
As Yahshi scooped ice from the chest into a bag, he observed SUNNA, whose eyes were closed. He was breathing unsteadily as Dr. BLIMMERY wrapped his arm in a bandage.
SUNNA, are you still...
I'm still breathing. Sorry to break the news, but you didn't kill me yet.
Yahshi took a seat next to VELL and spoke to her quietly so the others couldn't hear.
That didn't go as planned.
It went horribly.
How's your shoulder?
Hurts.
Do you think you'll be able to practice this evening?
No.
That's fine.
Yahshi pressed the ice against his bruised cheek and flinched.
We should prioritize the history exam for now anyway.
I guess.
VELL stared at her boots, a foreign dullness in her eyes.
Don't give up, VELL.
I can't afford to.
Then what's wrong?
I'm just... considering the odds.
VELL stood from the bed.
I have to go.
Belladonna, Book 1, Nightshade Academy. Written and narrated by Torrefranca. Produced by Torrefranca and Wilson Hensley. Edited and mastered by Juan Pablo Diaz.
How did we get here? Something went wrong. We worked hard for this life that we don't want at all.
Cover art by Mad Studio. Score by Gita Puspita Asri. Theme song composed and produced by James Sinclair-Stott. Starring Jason Brown, Anthony Andreas Echeverri, Philip Krajinoff, Melissa White, Alex Bowie, Patrick Vierzba, Julia Ristow, David John Bors, Connor Blunck, Kody Kiehl, Ellie Chua, Ben Autry, Walter Mack.
If it's really true that the sky weeps with us, if it's really true that heroes live in stars.
Featuring the voices of Gwyneth Evans, Jeff Rosenau, Lucas Hensley, Levi Titus, Angie Eggers, Willem Degar, Allison Prophet, Maria Palmo. Nightshade Academy is produced in association with Lost Island Press.
Remember